Shalom Vesalam zu einer neuen Folge von Jüdische Studien heute. Mein Name ist Dorothee Sommer, ich bin zuständig für die Presse- und Öffentlichkeitsarbeit der Hochschule für jüdische Studien in Heidelberg. Mit mir dabei ist Michael Engel und ich wechsle jetzt einfach mal ganz frech ins Englische, um ihn vorzustellen. Michael Engel did his BA and MA in Tel Aviv, was promoted from and in Cambridge, and worked at the University of Hamburg before coming and staying with us. His main research fields include theories on the human intellect, on immortality, and a focus on Elijah del Medico. While Michael's German is almost fluent, we decided to do the interview in English, as it is then only me who is stumbling, not him. Before we get into your research project, Michael, I'd like to ask some general questions who kind of bother me, but first of all, welcome, Michael. Hello.
Thank you, Do. Thank you very much for having me.
So, coming to the first question, you're now the chair of Jewish philosophy and intellectual history. What exactly is Jewish philosophy?
Well, Jewish philosophy, first of all, it's a category. It's a historiographical category. It's something that designates a certain historical phenomena. So when we speak about medieval Jewish philosophy or Jewish philosophy in general, we refer to a certain corpus. So it's not just an abstract notion that we can fill in the content any way we would like to. Having said that, one can also ask, but what does it mean more sort of in essential way when we speak about Jewish philosophy? What is the essence of this category? Not just the names, not just Maimonides and Mendelssohn, etc., Spinoza perhaps, but what is the essence? It's always very tricky to try and define these really complex notions and concepts. I would say, that's not just me, that's, I think, pretty conventional definition. When we speak about Jewish philosophy, we speak about a meeting point of Judaism and philosophy. So we don't speak about the philosophical aspects of the books of the Bible or in Midrash or Mishnah. We speak about the attempt of Jews throughout the generation to somehow bring into Judaism ideas, philosophical ideas that they find elsewhere. So this is the general model. And then, of course, according to the point in time, in the Middle Ages, it was Aristotle or Aristotelian philosophy. Later generation, it was Kant or Hegel, maybe even Heidegger. But at least for medieval Jewish philosophers or medieval Jewish philosophy, which is the center of my research, it's mainly Judaism meets Aristotle, if you really want to have it as a, yeah.
So not every Jewish philosopher does Jewish philosophy?
No. Short answer, yeah.
Okay, and is there, because all the people you mentioned are dead, so is there still one Jewish philosopher that is alive?
That's a great question. In a way, it goes back to what I said in the beginning. I mean, we speak about the corpus and then who gets into the corpus. It's not necessarily the question of the merit of the thought, but it's also the question of certain, let's say, the politics of academia, or more broadly, the politics of the zeitgeist. So I don't know whom of the current thinkers will be canonized as a Jewish philosopher for future generations. For that, we would need to wait, probably.
Okay, so probably one of the attributes is that you have to die before.
Yeah.
And could you understand Maimonides without Judaism?
Great question, but again, I would say short answer, no. The short explanation why not, it is just because, it would be even on a literal sense to understand Maimonides, because even in his most philosophical moments, there are citations from the Bible and from Midrashim. Even in the Guide of the Perplexed, which is considered his most philosophical work, it's very difficult to really read it cover to cover, let's say, without having any idea about Judaism. Moreover, some parts, especially in the third part, but probably elsewhere, some sections of Maimonides' guide are yeah, I mean, it's mostly Jewish sources in some of the chapters. So that just concerning the understanding of the text, but more profoundly, let's say, I mean, Maimonides was trying again to somehow harmonize or point to the inner harmony between Judaism and philosophy. So if you take away one part of the equation, that's not doing justice to his thought, I would say.
And given the fact that we just said that to belong to the corpus of Jewish philosophers, most probably you have to be dead. But you're sitting here, so I leave that out, the Jewish part. But are you a philosopher?
Maybe when I die, when I'm dead.
No, by now.
Yeah, right now not. But I would say also after I'm dead, I probably won't make it into the canon, and that that has to be more to do more with the nature of my work, my output. Let's say I'm really a researcher of medieval Jewish philosophy. I'm very happy to do that, both professionally, personally, spiritually, if I may say. I know spiritually sounds too, but I find great satisfaction from doing that. And of course, when I research and when I teach and in seminars and also in the Hochschule, having here the great students that we do, I mean, we do get into all sorts of philosophical discussion, and there are moments when I'm even telling the students, you should write this down, maybe we should publish it, or you should work on that, or so. There are moments when I sort of think, maybe I've come across something, that I can declare myself as a philosopher through this insight. But mostly what I do is just to research the work of those who are already dead and who already left their mark on the field of Jewish philosophy.
So one of them is Elijah del Medigo. You talked also, actually I have to say, though I did have philosophy in school, not Jewish philosophy, but philosophy, I never heard about Elijah del Medigo. You talked about him at your inauguration lecture.
Have you heard about Ibn Rushd of Averroes? Sorry for cutting you.
Now I have to say no again,
no, okay.
And then you know that I'm not.
Then wow, please.
Anyway, so I never heard about him, but you are following him now already over 10 years. What is it about him that fascinates you?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit difficult to give a concise answer to this question in the context of a podcast, so it's not too long.
Especially regarding your background of philosophy,
yeah.
You have to kind of
exactly.
elaborate.
And I always tell students, what you can say in 1 hour, you can say in 5 minutes or in one. So practice what you preach. It's difficult to both explain to you and to others like you who didn't study.
Okay, maybe I try to redefine my question. How did you get to him, and why didn't you let him go?
Okay, that's more or less how I was going to answer. That's how you read my mind. I mean, how did I get to him? I mean, Elijah del Medigo is a Jewish philosopher who lived in the 15th century. He was originally from Crete, but he spent most of his life in northern Italy, in Venice and territories belonging to Venice, because Crete was also back then part of the Venetian Republic or Empire. And what I really find fascinating Elijah del Medigo really brings all the threads together, if you'd like. So he's discussing theological questions through a philosophical lens. So, for example, the immortality of the soul, or what does it mean to be human, or the meaning of human existence. He's discussing it as a Jew, but through the framework of Aristotelian philosophy. And he does so by citing and commenting on the works of mainly Muslim authors, Ibn Rushd mainly. And he does that within a Christian context. So I didn't say much about what he actually says, but just about what drew me to him. It's just him being in between, so having a Jewish identity, and a Jewish identity that he's repeatedly referring to, but working again within the context of a Christian university, commenting on the work of a Muslim author. So that in itself is something that attracted me. And then there is the philosophy, and the questions that he's dealing with are perhaps the most fundamental questions, both from a philosophical and a theological or Jewish perspective. Again, what is the human soul? What makes the human soul special? What about immortality? What is the nature of the world of the universe, of existence, so really fundamental philosophical questions, and the way he's dealing with them, perhaps not highly original in the sense that he's constantly drawing on other sources and creating a sort of mosaic, but there's something in the way he's creating this mosaic and in the nature of his activity that I find particularly attractive.
Does it make a difference when you look at Jewish philosophers, if they were religious or not? Or were they all religious?
Well, again, because I work mainly on medieval philosophy, I mean, of course, to ask, this category of being religious or not religious...
It's very, very modern.
Yeah, so it's it will be a bit anachronistic. But, it's a valid question.
Observant, maybe?
Observant, yeah, they were all observant. Maybe the question is whether they really believed what they were preaching as Jews. And you have an entire school within the study of medieval Jewish philosophy that says, maybe they were observant and they were preaching others to be observant, but deep inside they actually thought that this is just, that religion is just something that one should follow from political or communal reasons. But deep inside, to answer your question, they were just as philosophical as Aristotle, and they thought that the way to understand the world is through an Aristotelian lens, and you don't need a Jewish scripture for that. So some scholars would say that no, you don't need to be Jewish in order to answer philosophical questions, also not in the Middle Ages. I tend to think that it's probably more nuanced, and that someone like Maimonides or Gersonides definitely, and others, they were trying to work out the tension that you have between your Jewish belief and Jewish identity and exposure to non-Jewish philosophical sources. There was a tension then again that maybe they tried to solve, but nonetheless it's still there. And my approach is to enjoy this tension rather than trying to resolve it one way or another.
And you said that he was living in a Christian environment, but reflecting on Muslim philosophers' thoughts. He said himself was Jewish. How far does it go that you include his environment, his familiar background? I said before, I had philosophy in school, and we did a lot on Nietzsche. And years later, I read about him and Lou Salome, and how he had a crush on her, and he always failed, and how he was crying all the time. Not everything's true, but never mind. I read about him and his biographical background, and somehow I thought I should have known that before. Reading on his philosophy, I should have known that before to better understand his thoughts. Is that true, or does that more deflect from the results that... I'm not sure.
Yeah. Wow. That's again. It's a great question. It was published in Hebrew. There was this monograph by I forgot his name, Sherpstein, I think. But I think he passed away already. A few years ago. A retired professor from Tel Aviv University of Philosophy, and the title of the monograph was "Philosophers as Humans," and the whole point of the monograph was to start with the biography and to see, a bit like what you just said, how we can understand the philosophy in light of the biography, but to start in all the time. And I remember reading this book being somehow disappointed or frustrated and feeling, okay, biographies are relevant for sure, but the philosophy should not be reduced to a biography. And I think in the case of medieval thought in general, and I've also worked on Christian authors, and especially in medieval philosophical thought, there is something very structured to begin with. So there are very definite categories and concepts, and then the making of medieval philosophy, or the way it was being practiced, sometimes it's almost like they're really creating a mosaic. So they are taking a concept from here, a bit of Aristotle, a bit of Plato, they mix it, a bit of like this.
Eclectic.
Yeah, that's a very good word. Eclectic, but not just eclectic for the sake of eclectiveness, if that's a word, but really trying to create something from existing pieces of puzzle. And And because of that, I think that the biographical aspect or element is even less present. I mean, Nietzsche is, I don't know if a good example or a bad example, but it's a very radically different example, right? Because his philosophy is very biographical. When you read Descartes, I mean, the biography, or at least if not the biography, the existential aspect, let's say, of them living or existing as concrete human beings, in Descartes' meditations, it's there from the first chapter. So this reference to oneself as an existing human being, and through that perspective doing one's philosophy, you don't find it that frequently in medieval philosophy. It's way more detached and abstract to begin with.
Maybe that is the reason why we don't have these superstars in our days, because they're still too close to us. Because while you're still alive, everyone can see how you live, how you teach, if you're married or not, or whatever. But when philosophers are dead, I mean, you first look at their works and their thoughts, and not how many relationships did they have. Maybe that makes it easier to look at what they produced.
Moreover, I would say that, and I would even... Sorry, the podcast is becoming very philosophical. But okay, great. So I would say, I would reinforce what you've just said. I agree completely, but I would even take another step. It's more than that. So when you read medieval Jewish authors like Maimonides and others write about Aristotle, it's not only that they respect Aristotle because he's dead already, and and he has this aura. It's almost as if he never lived, in the sense that he was always there. And so Aristotle is almost an embodiment of human, not intelligence. What's the word? Human
ratio.
Ratio, yeah. As such, and I think both Ibn Rushd, and I think was Muslim, but I think Maimonides is also. When they refer to Aristotle, they say Aristotle just reached the peak of human perfection, qua human, so as human. And of course, then you need religion to take you further. But he that's the word I was looking. So he embodies human perfection. He has this mythical or quasi-mythical status, and our zeitgeist goes in the other direction, I guess. So we are more busy with mythologizing rather than creating mythologies.
But would you say that because we now have this overwhelming Aristotelian thoughts, would you say that then medieval philosophy is not to be understood without Aristotle, because all of them knew him?
Yeah, absolutely. You cannot understand medieval philosophy in the sense, again, that we refer to a certain corpus, both in the Jewish, Muslim, and Christian context. Averroes, Ibn Sina, Al-Farabi on the Muslim side, Maimonides, Gersonides, Ibn Daud on the Jewish side, Aquinas and Duns Scotus and everyone on the Christian side. You cannot understand none of the names I've mentioned without having an idea of who was Aristotle and what did he teach. It's simply impossible, because they constantly refer to him, and also when they don't refer to him, the categories and the concepts and the way of thinking is present.
So
everywhere.
As soon as you read something from Elijah del Medico and you don't know it from Aristotle, no, of course it could also be from some Muslim philosopher, but are there new ideas, or are there only variation of? I mean, is it possible to have a new idea, or is everything already written?
So the best way perhaps to think about it is that Aristotle famously, I mean, when you read Plato, so Plato has this really elegant way of writing and these dialogues, and it's lots of fun. And Aristotle is much more. When I first started to study Aristotle, that was 25 years ago. So when I first approached Aristotle, I remember one of the books just introducing him. I think that's the first thing I ever read about Aristotle. Auf Hebräisch sagt man, so the phrase went, "Egoz kashe lepitzach." It's hard to break this nut. It's difficult to understand. So it's difficult to understand Aristotle. Very often he writes things in a very nucleus way. So it's just sentences which are very dense and can be interpreted in all sorts of ways. And modern scholars of Aristotle are debating these ways till this day. Just last week, I was in a lecture in Heidelberg where a young scholar was, again, suggesting a new way of understanding Aristotle.
Are there new ways?
So, according to this young scholar, he gave a very good, I'm not being ironic here. It was a very good, quite convincing. So, yeah, apparently there are. So, that's what they were trying to do in the Middle Ages. They were trying to make sense of Aristotle while working these understandings into their religious context. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Okay.
So, but what about the research project you brought with you to Heidelberg? It's called In the Celebrated Land of Provence, Knowledge Migration from Provence to Italy and the Jewish philosophical tradition around 1400 till 1600. Tell us more about this.
Yeah, again, so to try to make it as attractive as possible, and again in a context of podcast
Sell it
setting.
to me, sell it to us.
I will do my best. The basic idea is that, and more, again, I'm hardly the first to, but I think in recent years, and probably again, that has to do with our zeitgeist, we don't just think about Jewish philosophy in abstract, but concrete manifestations. And there is the understanding that Jewish philosophy developed in different geographical locations, in different contexts. And Provence in Italy were two such places, centers, and it developed quite differently in both places. And to say it really, this is a gross generalization, and part of the project is really to see how much of these generalizations are true. But in Provence, Jewish philosophy tended to be, or by some authors, extremely Aristotelian, and even, getting, as far as the philosophical occupation is concerned, sort of drifting away from a Jewish identity and doing philosophy with philosophical tools and really doing Aristotelian. It's almost as reading Aristotle in Hebrew, but not much references to a Jewish identity. And in Italy, things were much more complicated. The religious tone, at least in some circles, was much more dominant. It's just very interesting to see what happens when sort of hardcore Aristotelian corpus in Hebrew reaches certain contexts which were way more, with perhaps more developed religious sensibility, to see what happens there. That's just one aspect of the project, but there are others. And again, mainly just to see how Jewish philosophy actually came to be.
And if you talk about migration, these are not only ideas that are migrating. There are people going from this place to the other and taking with them their ideas to, or how do I have to...
Excellent question. Actually, that's what I wanted to... So it's the people and it's the manuscripts. And in recent years, and again, here I have big depth to my friend and colleague from Hamburg, Yoav Merav, who has a project on medieval Jewish manuscripts, and just to see the philosophy as being embodied in the manuscripts themselves. So, and more broadly, it's sometimes referred to as material culture. So the people, the protagonists, the manuscripts, the teacher-student relationship, so all of these aspects are to be studied in the context of the project so we're also hiring here the Hochschule, a postdoctoral researcher, Silvia Negri, who will start in October and will surely do a wonderful work. Also, or mainly focusing on these aspects that we've just mentioned, so the people, the manuscripts.
I just try also to understand that we have different languages involved. So there are ideas traveling, there are people traveling, and they must be able to speak different languages.
Yeah, although the focus here is Hebrew, because the lingua franca among Jews back, or at least scientifically, philosophically, in the 15th and 16th centuries, that's no longer Arabic, that's Hebrew, although Latin is being read and, of course, vernacular. So the scene is complex, but the focus of the project is mainly about Hebrew sources, and there's enough to do just focusing on that.
And when you say Aristotle and more influenced with, more intertwined with Judaism or less, how about other thoughts, like you mentioned Ibn Rushd, like the Muslim philosopher? do you see influences also from his thoughts in those manuscripts?
The influence is huge, and actually one can almost speak about Ibn Rushdism or Averroism, because Ibn Rushd is named Averroes in the Latin, so Averroism is a term. And again, just to, in the context of the podcast, Ibn Rushd was a Muslim scholar who lived in the 12th century in Andalusia, and he offered a reading of Aristotle which is very much freed from religious considerations, so almost a secularized almost reading of Aristotle. And this secularized reading had a huge impact on Jews in Provence, and they wrote commentaries on Ibn Rushd, but also without writing commentaries on him, they drew from his ideas, heavily influenced. So yeah, definitely.
And what do you think, like, are you at the beginning? No, you're doing this already. You came with it. So
no. I mean, I received. So the project was funded before I came, but the actual research will begin this October.
How long do you think it will take, or is that never?
I can tell you exactly how long.
How long the funding will get you. Yeah. But or let's say, what would be the best result that you can find out?
Well, that's such a good question, and I guess when you have projects, you oscillate between what you would like to find out and also this feeling of like coming almost tabula rasa and wanting to realize certain patterns that you couldn't even imagine. So I'm somehow in between. What I would really like to find out is what actually happened. So which works made their way to which centers in Italy, which protagonists were involved, how the texts were received, which impact did they have. Just to give one example, one of these authors in Provence was Gersonides, and he was very much influenced by the work of Ibn Rushd that I've just mentioned. And when Gersonides makes his way, not he personally, but when his works make their way to Italy, you find much reference to them. From what I've seen as sort of preliminary research, 90% of the references are negative, highly negative. But at the same time, they're citing from him and they're relying quite heavily. So this type of dialectical approaches is something that I'm hoping to be able to, shed more light on.
And who is the person?
And again, it's Sylvia. So I speak about me because it's difficult to come to terms with the idea that it's not me who will be doing the project. This was initially the idea, but I'm very, very happy that Sylvia will do that. Sylvia Negri, yeah.
So now, what are the other plans for the winter semesters? Are there any ideas?
I mean, if you just speak about the winter semester, my hands are pretty full because I teach a lot, as every other professor in Germany. So I'm really stunned by the level of certainly some of the students, BA students, and really more than one who are really excellent. So it's a lot of fun to teach, but then of course it requires more from me as a teacher, to come prepared and to be able to answer all sorts of questions. So just to answer your question, so just the teaching takes a lot of energy, and the project will begin. So only these two things are big, and then other things that are going on. But perhaps, so for the winter semester, there's not much else, but I just have a plan, an ambitious plan, to make Heidelberg and the Hochschule, through my agency, of course, not just myself, but through, let's say, my agency or my efforts, and now Sylvia and others that will hopefully join, to really make it a center for the study of medieval Jewish philosophy.
Wow.
This is really my hope, my vision, and actually there is not much activity on medieval philosophy as such in Heidelberg. There is a fantastic philosophy department, but they are doing either ancient philosophy or modern or contemporary. So, I mean, we're really filling in a gap here, also, from the broader university perspective, and to really push in that direction. That's really something that I'm very enthusiastic about.
So I have one more last question, which has not so much to do with you teaching here, but more with you as an Israeli person being in Germany. You live in Germany already for a long time. Mm-hmm. For how long?
10 years, actually.
Wow. What changed for you after the 7th of October regarding your personal life, but also your professional life?
Yeah, I mean,
Changed anything?
Yeah, I mean, we spoke before, and so I knew you would ask me this question, and there's also so many ways of. I didn't want to be too prepared, actually, especially for this question, because I think being as genuine as much is important, and just to let it's almost the subconscious, perhaps, because these are really very deep issues. So the thing that really comes up, and again, apologies in advance if it's not too coherent. I think one thing I feel in Germany, in Israel, and again, not being the only one who is feeling that, things that were latent and implicit are coming up to the surface in a way which is very unpleasant to watch or to witness. On the one hand, on the other hand, maybe it's good that things come out. So this maybe it's too abstract the way I framed it. So perhaps in more concrete terms, I feel that criticism towards Israel is becoming more vocal and more legitimate, I guess. I am an Israeli, but of course that doesn't mean that I think that everything that Israel does should get an immediate approval, but also not an immediate disapproval. I mean, things have to be evaluated. But what I feel that is happening now is just things are becoming very extreme, very polarized, very on the surface. Criticism against Israel very fast becomes criticism against Zionism, perhaps also against Jews. So I think there is something to this claim that there is very dark forces coming up now to the surface, which are very unpleasant, both as an Israeli and as a Jewish. But I have to say that also, on the other hand, within Israel, things are coming up to the surface, in the way of maybe Jewish extra nationalism, which also make me feel quite uncomfortable. So it's just lots of uncomfortable, scary stuff that come up. And again, my hope, maybe the only optimistic point here is that by this thing coming out, maybe there will be some sort of cleansing that had to happen. And I mean, the emotion, I'm not speaking about things that are happening either in the 7th of October until now. I mean, things that are actually happening are very, very troubling. So I'm not saying that should have happened, but just the emotions, if it makes sense. It's good that they are out, and that then maybe not now, maybe in a year, maybe it will take years or decades, there would be room for a more genuine discussion, dialogue, and for Jews and Israelis to again find themselves in the context of Germany-Israel relations and Europe-Israeli relations. That was a lot. Again, I hope it was coherent.
It was a really good answer, I guess, as although it was quite negative, it still showed all the nuances that I miss when listening to the people who know so much better how the world works and functions than I do, or think they know so much better and don't see the shadows. And what you just said is that it's so complex.
It's very cool. I mean, biographically, because you asked me about living in Germany, so I live in Germany. My daughter is German. I don't know if we will. I mean, definitely not in the near future for various reasons. But I don't think we will immigrate to Israel. I don't know what will be my daughter's relation with Israel. So that's something that makes me sad, on the one hand. But again, thinking positively, I want to do as much as I can to make her, a good reflective person, and then for her generation, on all sides of nationalities and spectrum, maybe they will be able to create something which is more productive and healthy, because at the moment it just seems very depressing, I guess.
Maybe I like the thought of you, now it's coming up and maybe it's better now. Maybe we can work on that then, instead of not having it in the dark and hiding.
That's a hope, but things can get even more ugly and more horrible, and who knows where the world is going. I mean, it's really scary times, and but if there's hope, then it's in that direction, rather than trying to put push the genie. It's genies actually. It's more than one genie.
Yeah.
All sort of
Many
genies.
bottles and many
Many
genies.
bottles, many genies. Pushing them back seems not so. You see, we laugh as we speak because just the thought is funny. But rather than hoping that there somehow will turn into something more positive.
This was less depressive than I thought, actually, because it left us with some hope. Now I want to ask you a question that I want to ask all the participants of the podcast. Is there something you want to recommend that people should know about? If it's a movie or a book or something similar you could share with us? And if so, what is it?
Podcast, I would recommend your podcast. That was it. I'm going to hijack your question no, because I really gave it some thought, and if I have the platform to really recommend something which has to do with books also, I have to say, and something that really changed my life, I have to say, and somehow is related to what we speak of. How curious are you now?
I am curious. You
so
see that I'm not saying anything.
I would say that an experience that really changed my life was around the age of 20. Now when I think about it, more or less the time when I discovered Aristotle. So it was more or less at that time that I discovered Buddhist thinking. And really no time to get into that now, but I have to say that I am extremely grateful for the Buddha to begin with, but for this type of thinking, which is both therapeutic, but also inspiring, and especially when you're dealing also professionally with monotheistic traditions and religion, then Buddhist is always somehow there to perhaps suggest something different, answering similar questions, but from a very, very different perspective. So both from, again, professional perspective, but also from a very personal perspective. I recommend for everyone, life is short. We probably live only once. So I really recommend to everyone who is reading this podcast. And this could be from, like really serious learned studies on Buddhism to some cheap self-help book, which I really love as well. I mean, so many takes on this tradition, and all doors will hopefully lead to so without sounding too missionary, I'm not a Buddhist, but really just as a sort of an inspiration on our life, especially if we come from a monotheistic perspective, that's something that I really encourage all to taste.
Thank you for your time. Thanks for the talk.
Was a pleasure. Thank you, Dor.
So להתראות ועד פעם הבאה.